Howdy Doody, episode 11. I know everybody just did a double take. No, hey, we got Howdy Doody today. Episode 11, everybody doing well. Don't Spill the Mixie podcast alongside my co host, Maverick, Matt Vieneman. We were just joking before hitting record. Matt, what do we got in the cup currently?
Howdy doody time. Hey, Big Red. Pleasure being here with you, episode 11. I know we got a really good one in store today. What is in the cup, or what was in the cup before we had a great conversation with your pops, was a nice gin and tonic with some Knickerbocker gin. And what about you, my friend?
I'm currently running on empty as well after about an hour long chat with my dad. We'll talk about that here in a second. But I had long drink. So
Nice.
it was
Well,
crisp, clean, refreshing.
perfect. Well, cheers to episode 11. And yeah, Father's Day. Cheers to all the fathers out there. Appreciate you. Had a household, not any, probably one of the toughest jobs, parenting and mother, father, raising children. So, want to give all the shout out, and it was a blessing having your dad on today as a father. And cheers to episode 11.
Absolutely. Cheers to all the dads out there. You and I both love our dads deeply.
Very
As
much.
we can see from the last two guests, last two podcast episodes, it's been a blast having both of them on. They're very impressionable on us and our lives and a huge part of us growing up. So super thankful that one, we were able to do it, one, they were willing to do it, and obviously we enjoyed it immensely. It was a lot of fun talking with both of them. So you guys will hear old Douglas Redford jumping on the microphone with us this week. He delves into a lot of his background with radio and kind of gives us
Mhm.
the whole long lineage of that, which I think is pretty interesting, pretty fun. Uh, Kind of the overarching theme is that's where my dad actually initially, through doing some of that stuff, met my mom. So to a certain degree, without broadcast radio, and I mentioned this later in the podcast, but I'm probably not around, and I I would say I probably don't have the same level of interest in doing something like this without my dad being as involved and interested in it too. So, for better for worse, here we are.
Yeah, and I thought that was very interesting how that whole correlation was, and we'll get into it with your dad here in a little bit about how he got started in late night radio and how many limited viewers he had, and then he had one interview with somebody that kind of popped his viewership up, and it only takes one interview, one clip, one something to go viral. But yeah, that was just very interesting, the ties that kind of had with what he was doing, with what we're doing, and kind of how we started this podcast together.
Yep. Some people, I think, chalk it up like right place, right time type of thing. I think you and I both would agree that there's a level of spirituality involved in that, being followers of Christ. More than right place, right time. It's the place you're supposed to be. It's the place we're called to be. And things like that don't just happen without God intervening and kind of weaving that and having that become part of your story. And like you mentioned, my dad gets into it a bit, but that piece was definitely part of the plan for him to be able to do that. And we hit on it, but those are some of the most fun memories that him and I have together growing up. I'll carry those forever with me. He'll carry them with him forever too. Like we had just so much fun doing that stuff. So we're excited to get into it. Fun interview. You can definitely hear my dad's broadcast background. Anybody that thinks that I have a voice for radio, I think his trumps me. He's a lot more polished than I am.
Yep.
He's eliminated the ums and the likes and everything else. So you can tell he's been in front of a microphone for a few more decades than I have. So we hope everybody enjoys. Have a great week, and we'll catch you on the other side here. Let's tee things up. First and foremost, welcome to the show, and let's get your radio background. Where did it start? Where's your passion for radio kick off? High school, college years, all that stuff.
Yeah, guys, thanks so much for having me on. I haven't talked about some of this stuff in a long time. Some of this stuff probably never, but it's been a long time. We're going back to the late 70s, early 80s for the professional radio stuff. But I first became interested in broadcasting when I was very young. I'm going to say maybe 7 or 8. My aunt, Carol DeLacy, for a long period of time, had a cassette tape of me doing play by play while watching the Stanley Cup playoffs on television. I did it into a cassette recorder. And if you need to ask what a cassette recorder is, you know how long ago this was. This would have been in the 1960s. I knew even when I was that small that I probably was not going to be good enough to play any sport professionally. And, that's really pretty much how it played out. But I kind of thought, if I could do play by play, I could travel with the team, watch the games, and get paid to do it. And so that was always my goal. And that thing with the cassette, I did that in high school as a freshman and sophomore for varsity football games. And I went back and looked, and it's still available online in the archives of the Port Huron Times-Herald newspaper. When I was a sophomore, they did a news story that appeared on the front page of the paper. And I still remember the headline. It said, Marysville sophomore does Cosell echo. And that was the headline. And I would just broadcast into the cassette, the Marysville Viking high school home football games. And so that kind of spurred an interest. Then high school ends, and I've got to pick a college. And St. Clair County Community College in Port Huron had a radio and media program. And so that's where I went to get the licenses necessary to be able to be on the air. At that point, you needed what was called a third-class radio operator's license. And to get that license, you had to go to the federal building down in Detroit and take an FCC test. And in this massive room in the federal building, there had to be 300 people all taking this same test. And by the way, what I've got here is just plain old water. Go Tigers.
Ooh, H2O.
Some ice cold H2O right
Yeah,
there.
that's what we got there. So myself and a couple of other students, we drove down to Detroit for this test, and it was, a lot of questions, timed, a lot of people, and I had worked hard to prepare for it, and was fortunate enough to be able to pass. Of the three of us who went, I was the only one that passed, did not have to take it again. And so that started my radio career at radio station WSGR. It stood for Student Government Radio on the campus of St. Clair County Community College. It was a low-power 10-watt FM station, easily covering the campus of St. Clair County Community College, but not much more than that. And I was an album-oriented rock disc jockey for about a year and a half. And also during that time, I also started broadcasting basketball games for the college, primarily the women's basketball team. And Mark, that's where I first actually saw your mom. She was playing shooting guard for the St. Clair County Community College Skippers. And that would have been in, 70, the season of 77, 78. That would have been her sophomore year, my freshman year. That was the first time I got a chance to see her. And she was an outstanding ball player, but I did broadcast SC4 games. And by virtue of that and my DJ work, I was able to snag a position as a disc jockey at WHLS Radio in Port Huron, 1450 on the AM dial. And we were an adult contemporary pop hits station. We played all the hits. And back in the day, it was 45s and 33 and a third LPs. We actually played the vinyl, and I started at that radio station on the midnight shift on the weekends when absolutely.
So what?
What's that?
No, No, real quick, pivot back. So, what shift were you working when you first started at St. Clair Community College? Just playing rock
Yeah,
and
that
roll and
was
doing
just
that?
like I would do afternoons and mostly evenings. So 7 o'clock until sign off, which was about 11.
W-
And
Was it
so, but
mostly just like, was it mostly just volunteer? Like you just
oh
could
yeah,
almost
it's
pick
just
like
you're
what
just
time you wanted to show
students.
up or whatever?
Yeah, it's just students, and you could, play whatever you want, but almost everybody played album-oriented rock, and they had a massive collection of LPs, thousands and thousands of LPs. And so uh, you'd go in there, you'd pull 35 to 50 albums off the shelf for your show, line them up and play them. And whatever you wanted to say, you pretty much could go ahead, introduce the songs, read the weather, do public service announcements, whatever you wanted, just to get some time behind the microphone. And so, yeah, I was playing. Who was I playing? I can't. Just
Had to
some.
be Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, it was. Yeah, kind of maybe, but it was even more headbanging stuff than that. I mean, because it was a college, and oh, I was playing stuff like David Bowie. Uh, oh, a lot of British rock. The Sex
Was that
Pistols were
pre-Beatles?
big. Johnny Rotten was big.
Was it
So
was that pre-Beatles?
that was post Beatles, but the Beatles had, yeah,
Wrong
they'd already
audience.
broken up by then.
Okay.
So, so that's where I got started. But because of that experience, the radio station WHLS was able to hear me, liked what they heard, and said, "All right, if you want to get started, here you go. We'll give you weekends, midnight to 6 a.m." Okay, and nobody is listening to an AM pop adult station midnight to 6, which is why you can start there. You can make all your mistakes there. But man, that was fun. You're playing the hits, and then I got experience, and because I was there in that station, I was able to get acquainted with the sports director and the play-by-play announcer there for the hockey team in the town, the Port Huron Flags of the old and now defunct International Hockey League. And they played in the league with the Grand Rapids Owls, Kalamazoo Wings, Saginaw Gears, Dayton Gems, Fort Wayne Comets, the old Muskegon Mohawks, the Milwaukee Admirals, and the
Who are
Toledo
now part of the
Gold Diggers.
AHL.
What's that?
The Admirals are now merged in the AHL, actually.
Yeah,
They're
they
like
merged. I don't know if anybody
the
else.
K-Wings are still around.
Yeah, but they're in a lower. I think they might be in the Colonial Hockey League or something on
Yep.
that level. And so yeah, that's I did color commentary in the 1979-80 season. Then when the current play-by-play announcer, a man by the name of Hal Moss, who is extremely talented, he took a job in the Philadelphia Flyers organization for the
Ooh.
Maine Mariners. And he moved up and moved out to Maine. And when the job became open, I was kind of like the next guy ready to go. I'd had a little bit of experience, and so I started off in that 1980-81 season with 4 preseason games, 82 regular season games. Every Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we had games, and then 4 games in the playoffs. We qualified for the playoffs that year, but got knocked out in 4 straight by the Saginaw Gears. But that was really my introduction to broadcasting, and I really liked it. I don't know that I ever worked harder than I did that year, because not only did I do play-by-play in the evenings, but I was the sports director for the radio station, and that meant that during the week I had to be on the air at 6 a.m. So it was a lot of work, but man, it was a lot of fun. You get to see how professional sports kind of really operates, particularly a pretty low level professional hockey team. And I'm trying to think, the guys that were on that team that played in the NHL, one of our goaltenders, a guy from Grand Rapids, a guy by the name of Gordy Laxton was the goaltender, and I actually have Gordy's old jersey in my closet here. So Gordy had a cup of coffee in the NHL. Um, who else? Mike McDougall played for the Flags. He had a couple of years of NHL experience, I think mostly with the Rangers. And there were a couple of other guys whose names I'm not going to remember.
I would imagine, based on what you and I have seen since then, and we'll keep unraveling the story here, but I would imagine, was it somewhat eye-opening and like underwhelming the lack of complexity involved in minor league professional sports? There's just not as much to it as what most people might think, in my opinion.
It's
Disorganized
no,
and like help.
actually not. Fairly well organized. The guys that are playing and the coaches that are coaching, I mean, that's their job. That's what they did for a living. So they took that very seriously. But in terms of like a front office staff for the hockey club, the front office staff was really one guy.
Yeah, non-existent, basically.
Yeah, he worked hard. He was a fun guy by the name of Steve Balcom. But there was only so much that he could do, and we were just doing all we could to keep our head above water. And the reason the team folded at the end of the 1980-81 season was that the city of Port Huron refused to underwrite the hockey club. The club needed $300,000 a year from the city to be able to function. And finally, the city commissioners said they weren't going to do that anymore. And without that money, the club folded. And pretty much that was the end of high-level hockey in Port Huron. They've had quite a few teams since then, but none that competed at that level of the old International Hockey League. And so that experience was really good. But at the end of that season, when my job was eliminated, you can't be the play-by-play announcer for a team that doesn't exist. So at that point, I tried to figure out, okay, what do I want to do next? And I figured that as a believer that I needed to really figure out what it was that I believed as a follower of Jesus. And that's when Beth and I decided that we would move to Grand Rapids so that I could go to Bible college at the old Grand Rapids School of the Bible and Music, which in 1993 merged with Cornerstone University. And so I went to Grand Rapids School of the Bible and Music, and they had a radio program. And because of my experience and education, I was not only a student, but I was an instructor there. So let me back up just a little bit. So when I left the radio station in Port Huron and we decided to move to Grand Rapids, I needed a job, and I had one connection in Grand Rapids, a guy that I had worked with at WHLS. His name was Michael Keyworth, and he was a DJ for WLAV. He was a rock DJ in town. He said, hey, if you ever get to Grand Rapids, look me up. He said, I'll find a spot for you. And so I hooked up with him at LAV, and he connected me with the folks at WMAX News Radio, 1480 AM. And it was news talk before news talk was popular. So before there was a Rush Limbaugh, we were doing news talk, and back in the day, our numbers were incredibly low. Nobody was interested in local talk from a bunch of folks that really didn't know what we were talking about. We covered the news in the area pretty well, and that was the opportunity. When I was there, I got to be part of a team that interviewed former President George H.W. Bush and actually got to ask him a question, surrounded by reporters from the Boston Globe and New York Times and ABC and CBS. He took a question from me, and I always thought that was kind of pretty cool. And so I did that. And while doing that, I had the opportunity to work with a guy by the name of Dan Dickerson. Back in the day, we called him Double D, and he was already destined for big things. And of course, now the play-by-play announcer on the radio for the Detroit Tigers. And we worked together for a little bit more than a year, covering news in the afternoons and the evenings. And so, uh, yeah, man, it was something else. We had our offices in the Waters Building in downtown Grand Rapids, and if you've ever seen the old sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati, that was pretty much what we were like there, and it was a bunch of people that were just in radio because radio was fun, and we really didn't care all that much how much money we were making because we weren't making much, but we were having fun because we were doing what we wanted to do. The
That's interesting because you tie it in with kind of what Mark and I are doing with the podcast, right?
Yeah.
And podcasting is kind of today's version of the radio, somewhat, and kind of what you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to. We have 10 views on them, 20 views on them. I think we maxed out at 50 or 60.
Yep.
So, it just where did you end up with your viewership and listeners by the time from when you started to the time you ended? Or were you even able to
Let's
track
see.
something like that?
Not to any real degree, because to really find out how many listeners you had in a certain time section, you had to pay for the Arbitron ratings. And then the radio station, the owners had to give the jocks the Arbitron ratings, and they often didn't let go of them. They held them pretty tightly. Um, I would think
Because
my
it's a
big,
bargaining chip, right?
oh yeah, if you've got a lot of listeners, you're going to make more money. And
Yeah.
so if you did, they would hold on to it and not let you know that you had a lot of people listening to you. And so I think the most listeners I probably ever had was at WMAX as an afternoon news anchor. You're at the news desk and you're anchoring the news, and the different reporters are coming in with their reports. And I think that was probably when I had the most listeners, unless it was high school football, Mark, a little bit later on in some of the big games that we did. I think we had quite a few listeners that would listen to us back in, doing East Grand Rapids football, which
Yep.
was still quite a ways down the road yet. And so I eventually got out of radio because I needed to make more money. And so I moved into nonprofit fundraising and did that for about 30 years. And during that time, I worked for Mel Trotter Ministries, the rescue mission downtown. And one year, well, for several years, we were sponsors of the West Michigan Whitecaps. They would have once a year, they'd have Mel Trotter Day at the ballpark. And as part of the deal that we purchased, a representative from the organization would be able to go on the air on the Whitecaps broadcast of that night's game and talk with the guys who were the announcers. And at that point, it was Rick Berkey and Steve Lloyd Jones were doing play-by-play. And so I get up in the booth and I, get the headset on like right here. And Rick Berkey had somehow heard that I had some experience in play-by-play. And he says, "You ready to go?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You want to do some Whitecaps play-by-play?" And I said, "Well, sure, I'll give it a spin." And he said, "Okay, here's your big chance right here." He said, "This next batter," he said, "I'm going to give you the first pitch." He said, I'm like, "First pitch?" He said, "Yeah, just the first pitch, not the first batter, but the first pitch." He said, "That's what you get to call." And so what happened was the pitch comes in and it was called a ball. There was a runner on first. He breaks for second to steal second. He gets caught in a rundown between first and second and eventually gets tagged out. But the Whitecaps manager is upset about the call, so he comes running out of the dugout to argue with the umpire before he gets tossed from the game. And that was my one pitch. And I can see out of the corner of my eye that as I'm describing all of this, Rick is to my right. He's laughing. Steve Lloyd Jones is to my left. He's laughing. And we finally, things settle down. And I turn it back to Steve Lloyd Jones for pitch number 2. And so I had just a good time. It was just fun. They're laughing.
So you got to your one pitch. You got to call somebody getting caught in a pickle.
Yeah.
And you got to call the manager getting the hook.
Yeah, in one pitch.
So your one pitch is like a 5-minute conversation describing what's going on in the field. That's crazy.
I think Rick was surprised that I was able to handle it, that I didn't get lost in all of it, was able to keep track of everything going on, and he apparently was pretty impressed because after my pitch and after that half inning, I left the booth and we had a display in the concourse there at LMCU Ballpark, right behind home plate. He knew where to find me. He came down after his time in the booth was up. He hunted me down and said, "Hey, what are you doing this fall?" And I said, "Well, probably still working for Trotter." And he said, "You want to do some high school football?" He said, "You handled that amazingly well." And he said, "I'm looking for guys who know what they're doing behind the mic to do some play-by-play." And he said, "You interested in doing some football?" And I said, "Yeah, sign me up. I'd love to do it." So that year started about a 17-year run of mostly play-by-play of high school football, and most of that with Mark because he was my spotter for almost every game. And he's going to remember a lot of this stuff. We started first doing Catholic Central and West Catholic games with a guy by the name of John Kenyon, who was really, really good at what he did.
He was fun.
He was fun. He played for West, I think, right, Mark?
Yeah, I believe so. Based on, I distinctly remember him getting way more engaged in the West Catholic games that we did versus the Catholic Central games. And then, like, you always had
I don't know if you remember, we did a game at Houseman Field, and he took us down on the carpet at Houseman Field and showed us the exact spot where he blew out his knee playing football for West. He showed us right where the play happened and right where basically his high school career ended. John Kenyon was amazingly good, and we had a whole roster full of other guys that kind of came and went.
We kind of got shuffled around and did odds and ends teams for at least a year or two. And so for me, just different. For timeline too. So all this was happening. I believe I started, had to be around 6th or 7th grade, something like that.
You were in middle school. You were in junior high.
And it carried through. I believe I kept doing it all the way until maybe like my freshman or sophomore year in college, even as long as outside of you stop the 2 years that I played football in high school. So I played football my junior and senior year.
Play, so I stopped there. And then I came back after an extended absence and did a couple of years of game reports. It wasn't play-by-play, but it was game reports. But, Mark, I think our highlight was East Grand Rapids football. I think was a highlight. We saw some amazing players and some amazing games. And Mark and I were able to broadcast. How many finals games did we do from Ford Field? 2 or 3?
I think we did 3.
I think we did 3 too. The one that I'll never forget was the 5 overtime championship game, and I think that was Orchard Lake St. Mary's against East Grand Rapids. It went 5 overtimes, and we were able to do play-by-play of that game at Ford Field. Where they put us in the broadcast booth in the section that is used by the visiting NFL team's radio crew. That's the exact spot that we were at. We're 7 stories above the field and just some amazing seats. Just amazing how well you could see. But man, Mark and I, we had some amazing memories. We did a game one time in Zealand. That was a playoff game, Mark, in Zealand that we did, and they allotted us 3 feet of space.
I remember that one.
So
You were
Mark
broadcasting like basically right behind my head
yeah,
is
I
basically
was
what I
right
remember.
behind
And
his head. He's seated, I'm standing, and that's all the space we have because immediately to our left and right were other radio stations doing the same game. So
I have so many core memories from that whole period of
oh,
time between that one at Zealand. We were up on the roof somewhere for a game. I can't remember where that one was at. That might have been
that's
Muskegon Catholic
Muskegon.
Central.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
Muskegon
how
Big
that's what
Catholic
Reds.
Central. Yeah.
Oh no, the Crusaders.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
we
they
the you speak of the Big Reds, that's actually, and if
oh,
you Dad, you'd probably agree with me in terms of actual high school facility, high school fields. I would say Muskegon is probably my favorite place to watch a high school football game from
oh.
outside of like probably Ford Field, just because it's so unbelievably nostalgic feeling.
Yeah, the history of Hackley Field there in
Yeah, Hackley.
Muskegon. What a classic old place. And the press box is old school, and you're really close to the field. And the other side, where the visiting team is, there are no stands on the other side of the field. It's a residential neighborhood, so all there is a fence over there for the other team. They've got a bench. 5 feet behind it is the fence, and plus with the history of Big Reds football, and the players that have played on that field, and the history there it was an amazing experience to do that game over there.
Yep. So this one probably won't hit with you, Dad, but just for anybody out there, our generation, Veneman, I'll bet you had to have played backyard football back in the day, the computer game.
Oh yeah.
Uh, Hackley Field, for anybody that hasn't ever been there, it feels like they pulled Hackley Field out and put it in a backyard football game, and that's what they based the video game football fields on, because it's like, I swear there's like 2 or 3 fields in that game where it looks exactly like Hackley, and like it's exactly the same feeling, and like it just feels like it's been frozen in time for 30 or 40 years, and it's a time warp, and it hasn't changed, and it's still meticulously taken care of. It doesn't feel dingy. It feels, in the best way possible, vintage would be the word that I would use. Like, there's old that's run down. This is not that.
Yeah.
It's well taken care of. It's football the way that high school football is supposed to be.
And
And
Hackley
I think
for
the
our,
other thing, Mark, that makes that so cool is that it is an actual cement stadium.
Yep.
yeah, and Hackley, for those that aren't from Muskegon, is a hospital there. So Hackley has sponsored that for a long time. So it's
Yeah.
a
And
sponsored high school field by the local hospital group of chains there.
like Mark said, it's right in a neighborhood. And, when schools put football fields in these days, they don't put them in neighborhoods anymore. So people are able to just walk right from their house down the block to see the local high school team play. And that was so cool. And of course, the Big Reds were in a run of their own right there. They were very good, and were winning multiple state championships in that time period. So the football was really, really amazingly good, I thought.
So, yeah, just core memories. Like, everything just floods. Anytime we talk about it, everything just floods back. Between a big chunk of this period of time, I was playing soccer, so I remember Mom having to shuttle me from games and figuring that out and get me from a place where I was playing a junior high or JV soccer game to who knows wherever else I might need to be on a Friday to get to football with you. And then just like you said, the amount of really good, fun games that we got to watch and the amount of really good players. I mean, we were doing this in the era, for anybody that remembers, especially Michigan football fans, Kevin and DeMarcus and Kelvin Grady, who were at that time when they were in high school, everybody was thinking that they were destined to play in the NFL. All of them played high level Big Ten collegiate football. They were all really good. We got to watch both of the Glendenning brothers. Uh, Both of them, I think, ended up actually playing college hockey for the University of Michigan, if I'm not mistaken.
And Luke played for the Red Wings.
Yeah. So we got to see him in high school, so that was pretty cool. Who else am I blanking on?
There
We
was
got to see a bunch of college guys that ended up playing MAC and Big Ten football in general.
the tight end and linebacker, Viss,
Colin Voss.
Voss. Yeah. Whoa. Yeah, he went on to
Yep, he
play
was
for the
really good.
Toledo Rockets. Yeah. And so we also, Mark, remember we broadcast games from Central Michigan University and from Ferris State too. So
Yep.
we did Central, Ferris, Ford Field, and it was.
It feels like almost every place that had a football field in the greater West Michigan area, from probably just south of Ludington down to, I mean, we went down to Otsego. We went everywhere.
At our first season, our first game, we went to South Haven. And we did a game from South Haven that was West Catholic and South Haven. We did. And the South Haven AD was a former Tiger pitcher, whose name I'm never going to remember. But yeah, that was our first game, driving all the way down the lakeshore to South Haven to do this thing.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I mean, there's a bunch of them.
Gumpert?
That's it. That was it.
The power of Google.
Right there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Is he still like the AD at South Haven or something like that? What'd you Google to find it?
I just did South Haven Tigers pitcher.
Okay.
Well, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was a Tigers
the AD
pitcher,
there.
and his debut was 82, July 25, 82, and he was in the big leagues into 87.
Yeah.
The weaving of high school football into my formative years has been unlike anything I could ever probably describe to anybody, especially for somebody that only played actual real tackle football for 2 years in my life, which is kind of bizarre too, that high school football had that big of an impact. And I basically didn't play it until my junior and senior year in high school. And I hadn't cared to at all before then either. It wasn't like I had ever like wanted to and didn't have the opportunity or anything like that. It was literally that I just didn't care to. So, core memories amazingly deep there, going to Ford Field and having a press box pass. And I was probably a 14 or 15-year-old punk kid walking around getting as much soda as I could get my hands on, grabbing hot dogs from all over the place and just running around trying to figure out where I'm supposed to get the printed out stats in between each quarter. And like this 15-year-old kid is basically running around like he owns the press box because I had a press pass around my neck. And then the other one that will always be incredibly memorable for me is the couple of years where we would go and watch the whole day worth of football before.
Yeah.
So I think we did that one.
We got passes not just for the day we were working, but for the whole weekend.
Yep. So I remember I think we did it whichever day was the off day. You and I would go and watch all 4 games the day prior. And Veneman, if you ever get the opportunity to when you're back here, or even I would imagine they probably do something similar down there, but go and watch 4 high school football games from 10 a.m. in the morning until the last kickoff, I believe, was at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And you will be exhausted.
Just a full 12 hours of football.
Oh,
just
man.
wire to wire football. I remember the third game of the off day that weekend, the day that we didn't have a broadcast. We went up into one of the corners and like the top row of the lower bowl in one of the corners, and I literally for 2 quarters of that game, fell asleep and just cashed out from
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it was probably 4:30 in the afternoon, but I was just completely wiped. And I remember sleeping through 2 quarters of a high school football game while it's going on right in front of me. Everybody, it's loud, it's bright, everything's going on, and I was so zonked I just passed out. And then we woke up and watched the last game of the four for that day, and then drove back. And like that, doing stuff like that was just so fun. Like I'll never forget that for as long as I live, doing those things, because we took advantage of every opportunity that we could, because we had free tickets. We could go sit wherever we want. We could have probably even gone up in the press box that day and sat
Oh
for
yeah,
somewhere in the
oh
press
yeah.
box if we wanted to.
Yeah, they had, remember
Um,
they had those high back leather chairs that were just to the right of the press box at Ford Field?
Yeah, weren't they sitting at like bar tops or something like that, and you could just sit up there in kind of like an open air area type
Yeah,
of thing?
open area, and they had big TV monitors that you could watch, and
Which
yeah,
for us was always super fun, because like high school football, you basically never get the benefit of instant replay, because instant replay is not a thing. Like most places, you don't even have the functionality, much less
yeah.
the usability of it. It's not a thing that's
Now,
available to be used in high school
remember
football.
we had it for a bit up in the press box at East. They had a limited form of replay that we occasionally could see.
Yeah,
We did a game there at East. It was a playoff game, and there was a huge discussion about whether a play was a touchdown in the end zone to our right. They were trying to determine if the foot was in or out, and the camera tried to zoom in on it to see if they could tell. It was really, really close, like within fractions, small fractions of an inch, and they ultimately called it no touchdown. And so East was on defense, so East won by a fraction of an inch in that game. I don't know if that was Mount Pleasant that they played.
I don't
Uh,
remember that.
there, there,
I vaguely kind of remember it.
there's so many games. Oh,
I remember snow games. We did games where the field was completely covered in snow and we couldn't even tell what
oh,
yard marker they were on. And they were literally like old school guys were literally shoveling every
yeah,
5 yards, just
yep.
like you see in like old NFL videos and things like that. Like we saw it all. Like the people that make high school football happen on a week to week basis. I mean, we saw the highs and the lows of it. We had people that were grumpy as all get out with us that didn't really want us there. We had the amazing team that still does East Grand Rapids football, and like everybody that works in the press box and serves those that work in the press box. They were, say what you want about East Grand Rapids people. I know it's a very polarizing thing for people in West Michigan, and like the stigma of East Grand Rapids or whatever. You got the uppity folk in East or whatever you want to call it, but we were the beneficiaries of incredible hospitality there for years and years
What
and
was the name
years.
of our buddy?
He's the brother of the guy that's got
Gherkin, Jimmy Gherkin.
yeah, yep.
Jimmy's brother,
Um
was it Don? Don Gherkin?
Don Gherkin. He was the nicest old guy.
He took
Probably
amazingly good care of us.
10 years older than you would be my
Yeah,
guess.
and boy,
Probably mid to late 70s now.
the local restaurants in East would provide food for the press box every game. Whoa, good stuff.
We did we did okay back in the day. We did all right.
Yeah, you more than me because it was harder for me to eat doing play by play.
Yeah, that I didn't struggle for that, because being a spotter, I didn't really have to worry about whether my mouth was full or not, and whether I was like had sticky fingers or whatever. I just
Yeah.
needed to be down in front and mostly be quiet, so I couldn't smack the food, but I could eat basically as much as I wanted
Yeah.
to. And back in those days, I was smaller than I am now, so I could kind of slide in between some of the bigger guys that were kind of elbowing for pizza or wings or what have you, and make sure that I got what I needed. And then because you guys were like basically working nonstop, like I would just duck behind you, grab another cookie in between
Oh
series
yeah.
or
Oh
whatever, and
yeah.
just keep motoring right along. Like I would go back there. I remember you would send me on these weird trips to go grab whatever you needed to. Like, hey, I need a water, and then I would
Yeah.
turn around and the cooler's empty, and I'd be like, this isn't gonna work. So where do I go to go get a water now? And
So
like
I
there would be.
I need
if
to.
I couldn't find it, like run down to the concession stand or something like that. I mean, I would
Yeah,
go anywhere basically in order to do whatever we needed.
yeah. So I would be amiss if I didn't mention the legendary Buck Gino.
Who still
Buck,
is calling games, by the way.
yeah, Buck is still working for 96.1 FM The Game on Friday nights. I just saw that he was calling for somebody high school lacrosse semifinals. And
Jeez, so he's still like big time dabbling in the local sports scene
oh
then.
yeah, yeah. And I'll
I
tell
love
you,
Buck though. He's such a good dude.
Buck was really good at what he did. And the thing that I liked when I was doing play by play and we were in the pregame, I would say, Buck, tell us about tonight's game. And then I just sit back the rest of the pregame show because Buck is off and running. And there he goes. I'll get it back right before kickoff.
You'll give him a little quick elbow to tell him that we got to take one more break in between now and when we actually kick this thing off, and we got to get a 30-minute spot in there to do a quick break. But yeah, I mean, he came with not only did he have amazingly positive, upbeat energy, which if you listen now locally, you can still hear him on Fridays because he's calling the whatever the big game of the week is with Brett Bakita. He is very informed about what he's talking about too. He takes it super seriously, which I always thought was cool. It made it feel it was basically as big of a deal as you wanted it to be, was kind of how I always
Yep,
approached it.
yep.
And you always were very professional about it. And so like there were times when I felt stressed about it because I didn't want to screw something up. And I remember there were times when I would screw something up, but then like I remember there would be times after the game where you're like, it really doesn't matter because the people that are listening don't have any idea other than what I'm telling them.
Yeah, yeah.
So like I could just make something up as we go along, as long as I just don't stop talking, basically, and
Which
like continue describing something. They're not going to know the difference.
which I learned that actually, Mark, doing play by play for hockey. We all know how quickly hockey moves, and it's a
Exactly.
sport where players come on and off the ice very quickly. And so, as a broadcaster, you have to learn. First of all, you got to memorize a bunch of names and numbers, which isn't really as hard as it seems when you're doing one team all the time. You
Mhm.
identify those guys very quickly. And when you do the other teams pretty frequently too, you learn them. And so it isn't long doing hockey as you're calling play by play on the radio when you've got the wrong guy on the ice with the puck. But you learn quickly how to get him off and get the right guy on. So, and since nobody in the arena has a radio and is listening, it doesn't matter. You just got to get the wrong guy off and the right guy on. And it's pretty easy to do that. So,
Yeah,
Well, the
I was gonna say with him transitioning and calling lacrosse, I actually had the chance to go watch professional lacrosse here in Charlotte with my dad last weekend, and the speed of that isn't quite what it is with hockey. But I can't imagine being a play-by-play. And I give a lot of people, even in the NHL, credit because you have all the long names, the foreign names that you got to remember be able to call them. Just the speed of the game, I can't even imagine. That takes a next level play-by-play or broadcaster to be able to do some of that kind of stuff.
I always thought that hockey was relatively easy to do because the action is continuous. There's always something going on. And I think the hardest sport to do is baseball to do it well because there's so much time you need to fill. Uh,
Yeah, Mark and I were talking about that. I think on one of the earlier episodes about like how you have to come prepared with different random stories. I think one of them we were talking about they were talking about one of the pitchers. He does like a chicken tender review for all the ballparks that they play in throughout the year. You have so much empty space you have to fill with random conversations and thoughts and jokes, and you have to be very prepared for those. So I agree with you there.
I,
one skill that I think you notice if you start listening and paying closer attention to broadcasters too is, especially particularly baseball. Dad and you and I have talked about this. Like people that are comfortable with silence on the air
Yeah.
And you have to learn to get comfortable with silence with baseball. You gotta just let the crowd noise and the energy of the stadium carry you for a handful of seconds at least for chunks of the game. You got to be willing to basically hand it over to the crowd for a little bit because you can't. Nobody wants to listen to you endlessly babble about nothing for 3 to 3.5 hours because that's what it's going to be. So you got to let the game breathe.
And I think, Mark, it's a little bit easier today with the pitch clock. They've taken a good percentage of that dead time out of the game in
That's a good
baseball,
call. Yeah.
but still, the phrase that I used to use, good baseball announcers allow the game to breathe. And Mark's right, silence in baseball is critical. Um, you don't have
It's
to say,
jarring.
yeah,
It's jarring almost anywhere else in like broadcasting or radio or anything else, but I feel like baseball specifically, maybe just sports in general for a period of time, as long as you have ambient crowd noise
yep,
to know that like the feed isn't cut, like just letting it be comfortable and I think Dan has gotten really good at that, especially over radio because nobody knows what's going on until you tell them specifically what's going on. Like when
right,
you're watching it on
right.
TV, you don't necessarily need the description of what's going on. It adds to it, but nobody knows what's happening until Dan tells them what's happening in baseball. So like letting it go and letting the crowd run for a minute after something happens and you can kind of hear the buzz and the electricity in the stadium and you can hear the hot dog guy yelling hot dog and all this
Yeah.
stuff like that feeds into the nostalgia I think and like what brings people into still the radio broadcast.
That was a skill, Mark, that we used in football after a touchdown was scored. After the touchdown is scored, the announcers just need to be quiet and let, the crowd cheer and the band play and just the energy level to rise. And then when it drops down back again and the conversion attempt is going on, then you pick it back up. But when the energy of the crowd is so loud, just let them go.
Yep. And I think the good ones even today, even on TV, will let that happen for a while. I mean, I love Gus Johnson. Matt, I don't know what your opinion is of Gus Johnson, but I love me some Gus. I love big game Gus on Big Noon, um, especially because he's gotten to call some iconic Michigan football moments
Oh
over the
yeah,
last 5 years.
he gets all the
So
Big Ten. Yeah, and I think the only thing similar too would be golf, right? Like when I'm watching golf, sometimes I always laugh because they always whisper about,
Oh,
"Hey,
yeah.
this shot is not looking good. It's in the rough," and I'm like, that the players can't hear you, but it's more like the ambiance thing. And then as soon as it gets quiet, and then you can hear the whoosh of the club and the ball, and then you hear the crowd going, "Yeah, Tiger," or whatever it is. And then they just let it go there too. So that's the only thing I can think that
I
kind of
always thought
correlates
that
to that.
Mark could do golf really well.
useful Schultz that. If I had a better British accent that was actually genuine, I could probably rattle off golf pretty
Oh,
good.
yeah. Yeah.
Nance is Jim Nance is iconic with
Oh, yeah.
golf though. Like he's an absolute masterclass, and I think he probably spends hours leading up to, depending on who's winning. I think he spends his nights beforehand before they get on the microphone, figuring out what his one liner is going to be for big moments because his one liners and then letting the crowd run with it. I mean, they were playing the 2008 U.S. Open earlier today because there's the rain delay for today's U.S. Open finale, and his call. I'm pretty sure it might have been Hicks actually. It might have been Dan Hicks on that one because it might have been NBC. But Dan Hicks, and Jim Nance are masters of just getting in and then getting back out. Everybody doesn't want to hear you keep on rambling, and whatever you're going to say isn't as cool as just hearing the crowd roar. It
Yep.
brings the energy of whatever sport you're watching to life, and it makes you feel like you're actually on the ground. Just incredible.
So let me
No, go ahead.
let me just give you a couple more stories of just interesting stuff of life in the International Hockey League as a broadcaster. I used to broadcast games from what used to be called the IMA Arena in Flint. and you can see it right off of 69 there. When we did games at Flint, when the Flags played in Flint, the only way to get to the press box was to climb up a ladder that was attached to the wall. An iron ladder attached to the wall. And so remember that I've got two pretty large cases of equipment that I've got to take up to the press box area, which hung extended over the ice. So when I looked straight down in the IMA arena, I was looking at ice. But to get there, I had to climb this 15-foot iron ladder attached to the wall straight up. And the only way to do it was to carry with me a rope that I had already tied to my equipment. And I carried the rope up the ladder till I got to the ledge, and then had to lean over and pull the equipment up to where I was going to broadcast from. So, it's not all the glamour that everybody thinks. But I'm pretty sure Jim Nantz doesn't have to do that at the Masters.
No, I would bet not. I would bet not. I think he's pretty cozy wherever he's seated. I think most of the time he broadcasts from what's the iconic room at the clubhouse or whatever that they do all the interviews from. Butler Cabin. Yeah, I would bet that he spends a decent amount of time in Butler Cabin there broadcasting instead of being out in the heat potentially. But yeah, the utility climb. I mean that's not that different than when we were at Muskegon Catholic Central. We're out literally outside, wide open, electric equipment, like all this broadcast equipment, probably thousands of dollars worth of stuff. We're running cords, who knows how far. Like we're just trying to make do with whatever we got, and then we're trying to hook up. I remember the Berkey phone. That's a core memory, trying to get the Berkey phone. We had one of these little rotary phones that he would give us that we had to figure out how to dial in to get the broadcast going. Because we were broadcast. He thought it was the coolest thing to be broadcasting over the internet because he wasn't going to purchase airtime at enough stations to carry all the teams he wanted to carry. And in order to do that, basically, we were more or less using dial-up internet back in the day.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So, I would imagine there were points in time where we were broadcasting to sub 50 total people over the internet, depending on the game and depending on what else might be going on. So
another memory I have of the old IHL is that when we played in Milwaukee, we played the Admirals in what was then called the Mecca. And the Mecca was the exact location where the old Milwaukee Bucks played. And when Port Huron played, we used the same locker rooms that the NBA teams used. And in those locker rooms, I'll never forget the hooks on the wall for your clothes that you hung up when you put your jersey and equipment on. Those were placed on the wall for basketball players and not for hockey players. So they were placed on the wall for guys that are 7 feet tall, not for guys that are 5'5" and 5'6". So
and jumping to hang their stuff on the wall or whatever.
So the thing about the Mecca that from a broadcast perspective that was pretty cool was that you started like on like ice level, and you walked up to the broadcast booth, which was all the way at the top of the building. And I'll never forget, I was broadcasting a game there, and during an intermission, I counted from where I was to where the first person was watching the game. It was 35 completely empty rows down to the first person. So that's how far up in that arena that you were, which, by the way, does make calling hockey significantly more challenging. When you're that far away from the ice, the puck becomes very, very small at that point.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's not, and you're trying to follow that versus like trying to follow a basketball or something like that. Yeah. It's quite a bit harder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so,
No, go ahead.
So one more thing that I did in radio, for a couple of years, I was hired by a station in Traverse City to cover high school tournament basketball for Traverse City St. Francis High School. A buddy of mine owned the station up there in TC, and he hired me to come up. And for as long as Traverse City St. Francis stayed in the boys' high school basketball tournament, I was broadcasting games. And one year they made it to the state finals at the Breslin. So I was able 2 days in a row to broadcast games from the floor of the Breslin Center. And right next to me was the spot for the TV guys. And the color commentator that year was Rick Mahorn of the Pistons. He was right to my left doing TV. One of the largest human beings that I have ever seen. A very big man.
Probably for perspective, probably 6'10". And these days he's got to be pushing 350, 375.
Maybe not
Easy.
quite that big, but easily over 300. Very big. And then the next day, the color commentator was Tim McCormick, who played back.
I think he's closer to 7 feet.
Legit 7-footer, all of 7 feet, probably a little bit taller, and big. So,
yeah, he's still. Last I knew, he's still doing games on Bally / FanDuel Sports
yeah, I
Network,
think he
whatever they
is.
want to call
Yeah,
it for the
yeah.
Pistons. He works the desk, and I would imagine in order to have him looking somewhat levelly at whoever his cohort is at the desk there, they have some finagling of seating arrangement, either a booster for the main host, or he's sitting very, very low in the chair.
I would think so.
In that lowrider chair, seat all the way to the floor.
That's Veneman
That's
style
how I
in the
do it.
office.
Yep.
Basically, right, like I remember distinctly every time I'd come up to you in the office, you'd be basically like sitting in a Corvette seat, is what it looked like.
Yep, all the way down, straight
Yep.
back.
As reclined as you possibly could get it, and like even though you're every bit of 6'7", like you could hide in between the cubicle walls pretty good for a big guy. I remember your interaction with Mahorn too. I remember you told me about that way back in the day. Do you remember what he told you?
Who's that?
Rick Mahorn.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to get a picture with him, which he was gracious enough to do. And he's just sitting there in the stands, like the first row or two of the stands for basketball at the Breslin. And after I got the picture, I just wanted to kind of like engage him in conversation, just, because you got Rick Mahorn right there. And I said something like, hey, what do you think about the moves the Pistons are making these days? And he just kind of looked at me and he said, man, I am really tired. And that was it.
I gotta use that sometime. People at work call me, or I'm on a video
Just
call and
as,
say, man, I am really tired.
Really tired. Well,
It's hard to have a conversation if the person's just not really willing to engage.
And if they're really tired, apparently.
I took the hint and said, hey, thanks for the photo. I appreciate it. We'll catch you later.
It also helps when you're pushing 3 bills and you're 6'10", like that. That can shut down the conversation pretty quickly too.
I wasn't going to argue with him at that point.
Jeez, yeah,
Man.
I remember when you told me about that. That was a good one. Good old Rick. And like, it takes zero imagination listening to him on the broadcast to envision that conversation transpiring too.
It's like, I don't know who you are, man, but we're done.
Yeah, this isn't whatever conversation or whatever you think this is, it's not.
Yeah.
What was did you I feel like I've heard you tell a story once or twice before. Was there any good brawls in the Flags when you were calling them?
Yes.
Any bench clears?
Yes, we had one in Port Huron. I don't remember the team. It might have been Toledo, um, or Muskegon, but it started on the ice, eventually involved everybody on the ice, spilled into the benches, and then spilled out into the hallway of the arena. And everybody is punching everybody else. Everybody on both teams is paired up, and everybody's fighting. And it
How do
was,
you how do you like decide what you're gonna call in that moment
you
too?
just
Like
got to
you're just
describe
trying
it
to rapid
as
fire.
best as you can. You try to get the numbers of the guys who are paired up, and of course you're always kind of watching the goalies because they're not ever supposed to leave the crease, and they do, and they can get thrown out. But yeah, they go into the benches and tumble over the back of the benches into the hallway at McMorran Arena in Port Huron, and they're on a tile floor in skates just punching each other. And so by the time the whole thing ends, 40 minutes later, the referee's got to sort as much of this out as he can. He's got a little notepad that this whole thing is going on. He's writing down numbers because the linesmen are the guys that got to break it up. As the referee, he doesn't have to break it up. He just got to assess the penalties. And by the time everything clears and they're back to hockey, the the penalty boxes are jammed with players, and the team benches have 4 or 5 guys on them because that's all that's left.
Yeah, you basically have to kind of make a decision that you're not going to assess penalties to a few guys probably because the game has to
The
continue.
game has
Like,
to you got to have at least some guys, and you don't have to penalize everybody with the maximum either.
yeah,
I
not everybody needs a 5 minute major.
I also remember a game that I did at McMorran in Port Huron against Muskegon, and the Flags scored 16 goals in that game. And it was literally a hockey game where you felt that every shot the Flags took, it was gonna go in.
That
16,
had to just be
oh,
wild.
it was unbelievable how fast the goals were going in. You couldn't
That's like video game
you couldn't
stuff.
write them on the paper fast enough. If you looked down, you were gonna miss one. That's how fast they were going in.
Yeah, that's crazy.
No.
Jeez, 16.
So it was
I just
Mark and Matt. It was amazingly fun, very tiring, but uh, that was Mark where I first learned that you really didn't want to hang around a hockey locker room very long. I learned that there. You didn't learn it till much later.
Yeah, I remember getting indoctrinated in that. Well, you did public address announcing for the Grand Rapids Owls, who I think are defunct now, but they used to
The
play
the
down in
junior
Byron
B
Center.
Owls, junior B Owls, not the regular IHL Owls. The junior B Owls down at the South Side Ice Center, down in I think what Byron Center area. I think somewhere. I don't
Yep,
know.
yep, down in Byron
Oh
Center.
boy, that was
That
something,
locker room
wasn't it?
smelled. That was the worst smelling room that I've ever entered into. I
Oh
can assure you. And you had to go in there and get pronunciations
yeah,
before the game and rattle through everything. And I walked right back
it was
out. I was
all
like,
you
I don't
could.
need to
You
be
could
in here.
hardly breathe. It was so bad.
Like the stench of old sweat and sweaty pads and everything else. Like it just, oh cow. I just walked right back out. I was like, there's no purpose for me to be in here. I'm out of here. You just had to track down the one of the assistant coaches or
Yeah,
whatever to get pronunciations for the two teams, and I
and
was like, this has
and
no
then
bearing
and
to me.
then
I'm
we
out.
stood between the two teams. We were at the timekeeper's box, and we've got one team on our left and one team on our right. Oh man,
I was probably like 12 at the
yeah.
time, and I heard words said during that hockey game that I have never heard before or basically
Yeah.
almost at. Yeah, like just the level of vulgarity being thrown back
Oh
and forth between the
man,
two teams and even the coaches at
the
each other.
coaches. Oh yeah,
Uh,
they were the worst.
like they just like the stuff that was just rattling off was just absolutely jaw-dropping to me as a 12-year-old kid.
You'd hear something and you'd think for a second, I'm pretty sure that what he just said is anatomically impossible to do.
Yeah, the stuff that they would
Oh,
just rattle off, and it was just like a Thursday night for them. Like
oh
this is
yeah.
just normal stuff, and like holy moly, oh, unbelievable. That was an experience all its own too, because the junior B Owls were just as bad as whoever the Flags had been playing that day because they would give up 15 goals, I think, on
Oh,
average.
oh, at least. I think the one year they gave up more than 400 goals in one year and did not get to 100 goals themselves. The
Yeah,
worst
that's
hockey
outrageous.
team I have ever seen in my life.
Oh, I think I only went to like one or two of those games with you because I was like, this isn't really very fun and it's not that interesting for me to watch because it's just not good hockey.
It was
So I was like,
horrible.
I don't really want to go. And there wasn't really a reason for me to go either, other than to just watch and hang out. Like it wasn't like I was a spotter or anything like that because you were just a PA guy. So like it wasn't like you were sitting there broadcasting end to
Didn't I
end the
have
whole
you
thing.
run the
Like you would just
music?
yeah. Now that you mention that, I might have. That might have been the only thing, but even still, with that, like that
We
really
had
wasn't like
we
that
had
big
the
of a
timekeeper was right there with us. I don't remember her name.
Val.
Oh, Val. Oh my. Oh
I don't remember her
yeah.
last name, but she was an old bag of bones, and I think she probably is buried somewhere under the arena now. Would be my
She was
hunch.
pretty spicy too.
Yeah, she for an older lady, she had a mouth on her too, so she fit right in.
Oh yeah.
You could tell how she got the job. She just opened her mouth, and they're like, "Yeah, you're hired. You're good here." Man.
So
So all that to say, an hour and 10 minutes in, the lesson to be learned here is without somebody inventing broadcast radio back in the day, I'm probably not around. Is what the synopsis here. Oh, did I cut out there for a second?
yeah.
Yeah, I put a marker on it so that you can catch it.
Oh, I was going to say the lesson to be learned here is without broadcast radio, I'm probably not around. Is the lesson for people to take away today. Without that, without you doing your thing in radio, Dad, you definitely don't cross paths with Mom back in the day, and then consequently, I'm not here doing a podcast 50 some odd years later or whatever.
So yeah, and I also got really to know her when she played recreation softball for the team that my aunt coached and I was the scorekeeper for. And so she was in town to do that, and then she also attended the same church that I did. So I got to connect with her in a couple different locations, and that was how our relationship started with basketball and softball and church. So that was it. That was back in 1978. So,
The
Nice.
70s. What a wild time.
wow, the 70s. Yeah. Casey
Wild
Kasem,
time.
America's Top 40.
That's amazing.
Uh,
Thanks for the invite, guys. I had a lot of fun, a lot of good memories. I got to work with and meet a lot of amazing people that I otherwise never would have come in contact with. And so it was and has been a lot of fun. And mostly it was a lot of fun because I got to do a lot of it with Mark. And so that was kind of like, and we got to keep Radio Shack in business for about 15 years longer than probably what they
yeah,
deserved.
cobbling together radio equipment.
Love Radio Shack. Love Radio
R.I.P.
Shack.
to Radio Shack.
Yeah, there you go.
Unbelievable.
All right, guys, thanks.
All
Have
right.
a good one. We'll see ya. Yep.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, Dad.
Yep.